I want to be clear about something before I start. I'm not someone who scares easily. I've been camping alone since I was 19. I've done solo trips in weather that made other people's eyes go wide when I described it afterward. I've camped in places with no cell signal, no nearby roads, no reasonable expectation of help if something went wrong. I know how to read a forest. I know the difference between sounds that mean something and sounds that don't. What happened 2 years ago in Daniel Boone National Forest was different, not because it was loud or dramatic or violent, because it was patient. I went in on a Thursday afternoon in late October, planning 3 nights alone. The park was quiet, deep into fall, past peak foliage, the kind of empty that serious solo campers prefer. No crowds, no noise from neighboring sites, just the forest doing what forests do when humans aren't performing for each other. I found a good spot about 2 miles from the nearest trail intersection. Flat ground, good drainage, a clean sightline in most directions. I'd camped in this general area before. It felt familiar in the way that certain landscapes do. Not comfortable exactly, but known. I had my tent up and a small fire going before dark. Ate, read for a while. Let the fire burn down. Went to sleep around 10. Somewhere past midnight, I woke up for no reason I could identify. No sound. No movement. Just the sudden, clean fact of being awake, like a switch had been thrown. I lay still and looked at the nylon ceiling of my tent and waited for whatever had woken me to announce itself. And then I saw it through the trees. A campfire, about 200 yards northeast, burning steadily between the trunks. Orange and quiet, and completely ordinary looking. I watched it for several minutes. It didn't flicker the way a fire does when someone moves near it. It just burned, still and constant. I told myself it was another camper. Late arrival, poor site selection, nothing unusual. I went back to sleep. In the morning, I walked northeast and counted my steps. At 200 yards, I stopped. There was nothing there. No fire pit. No ash circle. No scorched earth. No blackened stones. No burned-off undergrowth. I crouched down and pressed my palm to the ground where the fire should have been. The soil was cold. Not recently cold. Deeply cold. The cold of ground that hasn't been touched by heat in a very long time. I stood up and looked around for a long moment. Then I walked back to camp and didn't think about it as hard as I could for the rest of the day. The second night was when I understood that something was wrong. Not uneasy. Not spooked by shadows and unfamiliar sounds. Wrong. The word that means your instincts have processed something your conscious mind is still catching up to. I woke at 2 a.m. to a sound like a gunshot, a tree falling, the specific explosive crack of a trunk giving way, followed by the long, tearing descent, and the final heavy crash of something massive hitting the ground. It came from the west, maybe 150 yards out. I sat up. Fell trees happen. Wind, rot, root failure. I ran through the list. There was no wind. The air was completely still, the kind of still that late October nights sometimes produce, cold and absolute. Not a leaf moving anywhere. Before I'd finished that thought, a second tree came down. Different direction. East. Maybe 200 yards. 2 trees. No wind. 30 seconds apart. I was very still inside my sleeping bag and I was listening with everything I had. Then the sound started. I don't know how else to describe it except as a rumble, low and continuous, felt as much as heard, like the resonance of something enormous moving or breathing or communicating in a frequency that the human ear processes as sound, but that the human body processes as warning. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't any animal I know. It lasted somewhere between 45 seconds and a minute, and then it stopped as cleanly as it had started. The forest went back to silence. I did not sleep again. In the morning, I found one of the trees. It had come down about 60 meters west of my tent. A mature oak, maybe 80 years old, trunk nearly 2 feet across. I stood next to it and looked at the break point and felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. The trunk hadn't snapped under stress the way a wind-felled tree snaps, that clean break with the pale splintered wood fanning outward. It hadn't rotted through from the inside. It had been torn. The wood at the break point was gouged in long, deep channels, like something had worked its way through the trunk by force, pulling rather than pushing, ripping the fibers apart in parallel tracks that were too deliberate looking to be natural. I crouched down and looked at the marks for a long time. Then I looked up and saw what was on the ground nearby. My bandana. Red cotton. Faded from use. I keep it clipped to the hair. Outside of my pack with a small carabiner, easily accessible, habit of years. Both items were on the ground next to the fallen tree. Not dropped, not fallen. Placed, set down together with a neatness that was somehow worse than if they'd been thrown. Arranged, almost. Like something setting down objects it had examined and found uninteresting. I stood up very slowly. My pack was back at camp, which meant that at some point during the night, while I was in my tent, something had come into my campsite, removed 2 items from the outside of my pack, and carried them 60 meters into the trees, without waking me, without leaving any other sign of its presence. It had been close enough to touch my gear, close enough to unclip a carabiner, close enough that if it had wanted to do anything other than take 2 small objects and leave them next to a torn-apart tree, it could have. It chose not to. I've spent 2 years thinking about what that means. The fire that burned without burning anything. The trees that came down without wind. The sound that had no name. These things are frightening, but they're the kind of frightening that distance can eventually soften. Strange experiences, unexplained things. The world is full of them, but the bandana and the carabiner don't soften, because those weren't random. Those were deliberate. Something made a choice. To enter my space, to handle my belongings, to take them somewhere specific and leave them there for me to find. It was sending a message, not a threatening one, not "I could have hurt you," something quieter than that and harder to shake. I know where you are. I have been close to you. I chose to let you leave. I still go camping, solo sometimes. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The woods are too important to me to abandon because of one experience I can't explain. But something changed that October, and it hasn't changed back. Before that trip, being alone in the forest felt like privacy, like stepping out of the world that watches you and into something indifferent, something that doesn't care whether you're there or not. I don't feel that anymore. Now, when I'm alone in the trees at night, I feel the other half of the word. Not alone. Observed. And somewhere out in the dark, in whatever forest I'm in whatever weather, however many miles from the nearest road, I have the quiet, persistent, entirely unverifiable feeling that something already knows I'm there, that it knew before I arrived, that it has been waiting, with the particular patience of things that have no reason to hurry, for me to come back.